everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's Brendan. Thanks for joining me again. So I finally had it. I finally had enough with all of the different connectors. The XT90s, the EC5s. You buy this plane, it has one. You buy that plane, it has another. Then you got batteries here, batteries there. I got batteries everywhere. So I have found some different connectors that I'm going to use, and I'm going to show you guys how to change those over. They were recommendations from a friend of mine. I'll throw him props, Mr. Ronnie London. The guy's a wealth of knowledge. Overall, what I found from this hobby is you're cumulatively as wise as all the people you surround yourself with. So always be open to, you know, advice or recommendations. I put this one off forever, and I finally gave in. And I'll show you why that is in a little bit, but let's take a look down at these connectors and why I made this decision. So this is going to be my workbench for today. We are out here in the backyard and decided to take advantage of a nice day. It was a little windy here earlier, and it's not right now, so you know, we've been out here working. But anyway, so we have these connectors, and then we have these connectors, and then we have to use adapters. And here's the thing, so we have solid adapters, and then we have this. If you have the option between two connectors and you're going to use an adapter, I recommend you use these and not these, and I'll show you why. I had a plane up at the field. I'm just going to pan you down here. I had a plane up at the field that I almost lost because of one of these, and I just so happened to catch it when I was plugging it in, and I noticed that it started to have this wiggle to it, and every time I wiggled it, you would hear a sparking sound, which is really bad. Tool tip, this is called a seam ripper. You can find them at like Walmart and stuff. I do a lot of electrical work, different automotive. It's been my forte for many, many years, but this is called a seam ripper. They use it for clothing. When you want to open something up, instead of using the X-Acto knives down the side, get a seam ripper. It uses the ball. You slide the ball under the edge of this stuff, and literally you can just work it around, and it'll cut right through this stuff fairly easily. Just a matter of getting the ball started. And then you don't have to worry about cutting into the wires. So here is what happens and why these are never recommended, and I didn't buy into it. I buy into it now. So these things are literally hard soldered right on top of each other, and when they start to bend or get loose, or you pull enough current to melt the solder, then they start to move in here and they arc. Guys, these are garbage. I finally listened. I finally learned, and I'm lucky I didn't lose anything over it. So the benefit of this one is these are wired. All right, you're gonna see and feel something. Use these, not these other ones. So what am I going with now? I am going with, by recommendation, they're called AMASS, AMASS 150 connectors. They are anti-sparks. What is an anti-spark? You ever hook two of your, plug something in. You take your battery and you plug it into your plane. Let me get rid of this thing. You go to plug your battery into your plane and hear every time you do that. I don't know if you guys can see in there or not. You can see that there's black spark marks on the inside of that connector. You can see it is all fried in the inside of there, and I'm sure yours look that way too. When you deal with high voltage and you're getting ready to make those final connections, the air will actually ionize the electrons flowing in as you're getting close, and it'll actually create a gap, and that will spark. Electronics do not respond well to what we call voltage spikes. It fries things. You know, it will literally spike electronics and destroy them. These anti-sparks don't do that. So what do they look like? Take a pack of these, and we open this up. And on the inside, we got a bunch of different sockets and connectors. So you have black, male, and female. Just throw those there. And then we have some different pins. So we have the ones that you put on the battery, which is what I've spent today doing, which would be this socket and this regular pin. So it would be the short black one and this one. And you can actually put these together in a couple different combinations if you really choose to. And then the socket and the long red one, like that. In the plane, you then put the black long socket together there, like that. That goes in the plane. And then finally, on your positive, you put in here this anti-spark. And to be honest with you, I'm not really sure because I'm not going to rip one apart. I don't know if there's a resistor in here, if there's a capacitor in here, or it's just a spacer so you have a positive contact, and by the time you come over this, the air can ionize and weld itself fast. I'm not really sure. But anyway, these won't spark. So this, when you go to plug things in, this should be the very last one that you hook up. So what I've spent the day doing is literally cutting off all these ends off these battery packs. And I used to use these things from Hobby King. They're little red caps, just because I'm always afraid of something shorting these out. But I have red ones, and I don't know, maybe somewhere around here I have a green one, I think. Here is the green one. So I know that my batteries are charged because I just simply swap the caps on and off. It protects it and so forth. So that was a nice feature. Those I used to get from Hobby King for these packs. But I've been hacking all these off, and we've been changing them over to the AMOS connectors. Now these are, I believe, 7mm pins. They're very easily support 12S, and they can handle up to 200 amps of current. They're more designed for up to an 8-gauge wire. So the lower the gauge, the bigger the wire. So 8-gauge being bigger in diameter and holding more current ability than a 10-gauge would. But here's the nice part is when I make all my pins like this, it would interchange in between any plane. And one of the issues that I have is that Bayhawk that I've been working on for a while now is going to be 8S. So that is going to be two 4S packs in series. And in order to do that, I have to plug them together. And you can't do that with the other ones without using an extra cable. I've managed to find some of these caps on eBay. I'm going to use these just for protection, and they will go just simply over the top of the red ones. So that way I also know if red is just discharged and green is charged. Just peace of mind for me. Notice that I also use shrink tubing over here as kind of like a stress relief on the wire, so that way we don't have any strength or rigidity issues. But literally, when you run these in series, because these are the two packs that I'm using, notice how I use the blue shrink tubing there, so I know that those two will literally go together. And these things are super easy to get together and take apart, unlike some of the other connectors. And then I would go ahead and plug the black one into the plane, and then the red one would be the last one in the anti-spark, and then we don't have that issue. I was watching a live broadcast the other night. It was very interesting. I think it was Gooniac that was talking about it. Somebody went ahead and they did a live broadcast, and they were talking about Ohm's law and dealing with electrical. Yeah, it's advised you know a little bit of what Ohm's law is, but I think the relationship between amperage, voltage, and resistance is the most important. So when voltage goes up, if resistance were to stay the same as voltage goes up, current goes up. Proportionally as or voltage goes down, current goes down. What happens when we change the resistance values? All those sparks and arcs in your connectors create resistance. As resistance goes up, if voltage remains the same, which it will from our power source, if not go down, amperage will go down. Voltage is pressure, amperage is flow, like water. So when you have a restriction, doesn't matter what the restriction is, it's a clamp on the hose, you get no current flow. So all those arcings in those connectors are essentially bad. But now I know why everyone was saying don't use adapters. I almost lost the plane. I'm glad I caught it. I'm glad I took the recommendation to go to the AMOS. Listen, it's not rocket science. They've been out there for a while. Pick them up on eBay or FPV or other sites have them. They're all over the place. They're not that expensive, you know, horribly, but I do have a lot now to change in different planes, but ultimately it'll be for the better. So what I wanted to go through with you guys is how I go ahead and change these things. How do we solder them out and solder them back into place, and let you see that process so you know how to do it. You would feel confident replacing these. And as I said, you know, there's other videos out there on these connectors and how to replace them. Why do I do stuff that I know that other people have done before? Well, pretty much, well, it's hard to find anything groundbreaking within any industry anymore, because the world of information is out there. That's great, but we have a lot of viewers that don't subscribe to everyone else's channels and don't really look around for stuff. And if somebody they like watching on YouTube has it, then you know, they'll hop in and they'll watch their stuff. So that's the reason for this content. There are some other things that I have coming up that I also want to share with you guys. But anyway, let's get into replacing these connectors. So one of the first things you guys can see is I've used a screwdriver and just removed the pick off of this XT90 connector to remove the back side. And I'm using a set of these helping hands. You want to go ahead and tin your soldering iron. So literally I am going to just take this thing here, dip it in some flux, and then I'm also going to wipe it on this wet sponge and again in there. So you want your tip to be nice and silver, just like that. And with these helping hands, we are going to get this nice and hot, and I'm going to pull that wire off of there. And there's a lot of different soldering irons. Some will be a higher wattage, so you can use them to heat things up a little bit quicker than what I am. And notice the aluminum foil. Anytime I'm working in a plane, especially with hot wiring, this is what I do. I put aluminum foil in there, and that is to protect from burning the plane. The other thing that I have also found that helps is using, get a run of solder here, and if you just take a little bit of solder in there, get a little bit flowing around that pin. Some of these are a little rough to get started, and we'll get that thing to hopefully pop out. Okay, and then this I'm going to take before I put back away and literally put it in my flux again. And that is rosin core flux. The wire here is going to be a little hot, so we don't want to completely touch it. You can choose to cut the connectors off if you want. We only work on one at a time because I do not want, especially on a battery, wires to touch. So only do one at a time. All right, leave the other one alone. And with like the ECs, I got these nice straight off cutters from Hanson Hobbies, and you can literally cut the wires right off. I really don't like soldering these or the XTs. These are actually really nice. The first thing I'm going to do is, you can see the nice part about doing what I did here is that the end stays what we call tinned. There's some solder in there already. And the nice part about silicone is you can actually pull this stuff back a little bit, the wire on here. So you don't necessarily need to cut it, but I pull it back a little bit like that. And one of the things that we want to make sure of here is that, get this pin out. So we have this, we have our shrink tube of your choice. You need to make sure you slide the shrink tube over first. You don't want your wire hot, because then otherwise it will just melt right to it. I try and find the closest shrink tube I can to slide over the wire. So that should slide back like that. We're going to have to pull the wire out of this thing first. If you have a U-beck and the wire for the U-beck is coming up, this needs to be slid over both of those. So something to keep in mind, this Futura uses an S-beck off of the ESC, so I don't have separate wires coming in. And you want to slide your shrink tube away from your connector, and then here, slide this over. And keep in mind, this is already tinned, so I don't need to tin it. The insulation I pull back a little bit, but I do want to tin this connector. And how I do that is I will take this thing, use my helping hands like that. Again, pull out the soldering iron and the flux. And I am going to make the inside of this connector pin nice and hot. And I'm just going to start flowing some solder into it. So basically we're tinning both surfaces, and this prevents what they call a cold solder joint, meaning the solder flowed into one item but not the other. So you want the solder not to be balled up in there, and you'll see it. The solder will flow and it'll actually attach to all of the plating on the inside. And now with the wire, again, a little bit of flux. I'll take this helping hand off of here. Put that thing in there like that. And what we want to do is get everything in here nice and hot. And again, if you need to, it seems to work a little best. I'm really not sure why. If you start flowing solder into connections, it'll actually heat things up quicker. And you want to fill up that whole socket with solder, but you want to be careful. You don't want too much where it's running out onto the threads. If you get it onto the threads, it's going to be a pain to clean off. You can do it, but you want to fill the whole socket up. Pull that out. Let it cool. And I hope you guys can see. You can see that whole socket is filled up. The wire is pretty centered in the back side. Just giving this thing a second to cool. And once you think it's cool enough, you can slide up your shrink tube all the way up to the end of that thing. And you can use a heat gun. It's probably a little bit more preferred than a little butane torch, but I use the torch. Just a little bit of heat. Give that a second to cool off, and you can then cover that up. I don't put the connectors over right away because I don't want them to melt onto there. So the next thing is, again, we can take our helping hand here, like so. We will take out this connector. You don't want to try and get any of that carbon off your soldering iron. You want it nice and silver like this. You don't want to get that in any of the solder because then it creates dirt, and dirt creates resistance. All right, again, down in the flux. And while that cools off for a second, we will now take this. I gotta go find my cap. This thing is ready. Now you can just hold that. And these things literally thread right on. And if you want to check them, you can pull on them now nice and hard. You can see that thing's stiff, man. It's not going anywhere. So again, here. Sorry guys, I knocked you over. Don't get mad. You mad, bro? Anyway, I could take this here, hold it. I'm just gonna peel back the silicone covering a little bit. And this is so like you could cut it if you wanted to, but I don't like cutting it. I like leaving that end tinned. All right. And again, same thing. I'm going to take my shrink tube. I've done enough of these now. I kind of know all what I want for sizing. I use 1.5 inches total length on these, which means I snip that much off. I like 1.5 inches. We will take this rest of this XT off of there like so, and we will get our other end, our red one, slide that over, shrink tube over, and then we have our anti-spark. So we will get rid of this, and I hate soldering these on because I'm always afraid of melting those things. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff with these. So I'm going to put that in there again. Tin my brush. Put that in there, let that get nice and hot. We're going to flow some solder into it. That's good. Back in the rosin core. And this one I can turn there. You can see that thing almost wants to jump in there already. Start getting this thing nice and hot. Again, you can flow a little bit of solder. All right, quick camera battery change here. So we're gonna go back to this hot wire again, tin my iron, start getting this connector on the anti-spark now nice and hot. Flow a little bit more solder into there. And you'll feel it when it's ready. That thing will just slide right on in. Just like that. And I go all the way in, as far as that thing will go. Then you want to fill it up. Fill up that socket. And I think what I'm going to do is just get a little bit more just on the back side. Perfect. And again, the aluminum foil is nice because it protects everything. I have no worries of dropping a piece of solder and it going right through the foam or on another piece of electronic, anything like that. Now you can see that the silicone insulation there that I pulled back, I can just kind of squeegee it and it'll sit now right up against the front of that pin. I can slide my shrink tube right up in there Again, using my butane torch. Shrink that stuff up. Again, you don't want to get this thing really hot. It doesn't take a ton of heat. And that's closed off. Let this thing cool for a second. What I do is I get solder. If you're wondering what I use for solder, I got this also from Hanson Hobbies. This is 60-40, so this is 60% tin, 40% lead, I guess is what this is. As far as diameter, it's only 1 millimeter diameter. You don't want real thick stuff because then it doesn't flow well, it doesn't melt well. Get the cap. So that's my anti-spark, and that's nice and tight. You can take the aluminum foil out now and just set that off to the side. And if you really wanted to, you could have put a piece of shrink tube around both of these to hold them so they would be like this. I can do that later with a piece of tape. I think I'll opt to use on this so that way I don't have two leads, but depending on the plane, maybe it's nice that you do that as well. For the batteries that I'm using in this, you could see that I use a 52 or a 45. These are also Z-Packs. I've seen a lot of people asking about these off eBay. These things work phenomenal. I have no issues with them. The weight is comparable to everything else. So when you take these things and you strap them in, again, how do you hook up the batteries? So we are going to go ahead and hook those up there like that. And now the anti-spark would be the one that you hook up last. And you can see things fit nice and snug. Again, they'll hold up to 200 amps. And when you're done, you can twist them and make it easy to pull apart. I've never had another connector literally be so secure but be so easy to pull apart. But again, when it comes down to the batteries, doing the batteries, guys, make sure that I use shrink tubing again for tension relief on the wires, so that way the wires don't get weakened over there at the connection points. Again, you can pull on these things to make sure that you did a good job soldering, but make sure you only do one at a time because you don't want to be cutting and arcing and shorting things out. But from not down in the layer, outside enjoying what's left of our sunlight for a Saturday, I appreciate you guys joining me. If you like it, subscribe down below. Please share the information, hit that bell notification, make sure you select the all feature so you get all of the content. I appreciate you joining me. Again, it's Brendan. Peace out.